Well, I think that what we're trying to do is destroy the triggers in the air that have been linked to these types of problems, right? So this is where the field of medicine is evolving to, is let's not just try to solve at a symptom level. Let's go to the root cause of what's causing these problems to happen. And the fact that, by the way, the EPA said decades ago that indoor air can be up to 5 times more polluted, like that tells you something about the fact that we're living in environments where we're trapping ourselves with pollutants. And so, yes, we can take medication, we can take other things to maybe get at a symptom level solution. But what is happening and what are we doing about the triggers in the air that can impact us really deeply? And that's where this technology and what we started doing at Molekule came into play.
Welcome to The Disruptors, the podcast about the future of all of us, where we look at the technologies, trends, and societal norms shaping our collective future. Hear the world's top minds share their insights and predictions on the convergence, direction, and ethics of exponential technologies transforming life as we know it. You can learn more and stay up to date at disruptors.fm. Take a second. Take a deep breath. How do you feel afterwards? Today's incredible founder is tackling the problem of indoor air pollution, something you probably didn't know, but something that's massively contributing to poor performance, health, and longevity outcomes when it comes to all of us. We have Jaya Rao on the program. She's the co-founder of Molekule, a company that's raised $38 million to fix the problem of indoor air pollution, according to, I believe, the EPA, but Jaya references it in the podcast. There's 5 to 20 times more pollution in indoor air than there is in the outdoor air we're breathing. This is something you're breathing and living in on a daily basis, and the outcomes and health consequences are terrifying. We'll dive deep into them. In today's episode, we'll discuss the true epidemic of air pollution worldwide and why it kills 3 million people a year, how mold, toxin, and allergies lead to shorter lifespan and disease, why we need more women and diversity in tech and government and how to do it, public transit from a public policy perspective, which tech trends worry Jaya the most and why, and some of the big problems with the smart tech, health tech, and smart home movements today. Before we jump into the episode, take a second to leave a review on iTunes, disruptors.fm/iTunes. Help us with the gorilla when it comes to podcasting so we can grow the audience, grow our awesome guest base, and be able to make this into something that reaches more people and makes a bigger impact. That's what this is about, is to make a global impact. I think we can do it. We're up to around 7,000 strong, and we need to make our number much, much larger to make this into something that can change the world. Help us do that. Disruptors.fm/iTunes. And consider sharing the podcast with a friend. If you've got a loved one, a friend, someone you think who would enjoy listening to an episode, send them one. Say, hey, I was thinking about you, thought you might like this. They might love it, and if they do, you'll get all the credit, and just maybe we can make an impact. Without further ado, I give you Jaya Rao.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
So Jaya, Molekule, what's the deal? Why did you decide to tackle air pollution? And why is that actually a big problem?
Well, that story starts in kind of an interesting way. My father was a solar energy researcher for many years, very well established in the field of academia and solar energy, but started looking at air purification, not just as a scientist, but as a father. My brother suffered from really severe asthma and allergies growing up. And so it was after he saw that problem that he felt like we should be doing more to clean the air, because he saw his asthma and allergies flare up from all the triggers in the air and in his environment. So he began what became a 20-year-long research journey into the field of air purification to understand one very fundamental thing. Today, we're able to filter things with traditional filters. We're able to filter big particles out of the air. But what about all these microscopic pollutants that make their way deep into our lungs and affect us very deeply? How can we get rid of those permanently and completely? So that was what started this research project for him. And what it culminated in was a technology that works fundamentally different from what you have on the market today, in that we're able to destroy pollutants at a molecular level for the first time. So why that matters is because we're starting to see, at that time when he was researching this problem, the EPA had put out the stat that indoor air can be up to 5 times, in some cases even 100 times more polluted than the air outdoors. So he was really troubled by that, especially given my brother's asthma and allergies. But since that time, we've seen the problem is only growing, and it's growing massively on a global scale, not just in the indoors, but the outdoors. And they're both interrelated because the air that we breathe is connected to the outdoors and indoors, vice versa. So it's a big problem. We're seeing air pollution on the rise globally. Lots is changing in our environment, and finding an air purification technology that actually works was something that we all felt was compelling and should be out in the world.
Which is interesting. You founded a family-run business. Before we get into some of the other stuff, what's it like building a business with the folks?
It's funny because we started as a family-founded company. Yes, it was me, my brother, and my father, who are the original co-founders of Molekule. While we were family founded, today, if I look at Molekule, we're, globally distributed. We have offices across the world, people working in specialties like operations and manufacturing, all the way to R&D to, the finances and marketing of the company. So there's so much happening. We're such a bigger team than what we started as. But, it's always been, I think the part of us being a family rooted us in this extreme passion for wanting to solve this problem, because we had felt the personal impact of what I got to see my brother suffering from asthma and allergies, and it's not something that I ever wish for anybody. And yet millions of people around the US, billions of people around the world are suffering from the problems of these respiratory illnesses.
And yeah, most of them go undiagnosed, correct?
Yeah. So today, I think only 80 million, it's still a large number, but 80 million allergy sufferers have been diagnosed in the US. But, the number of people who complain about things like seasonal allergies, which, by the way, are becoming perennial according to allergists and physicians all around the world, these allergies are morphing and changing all the time. But most people try to medicate their way out of the problem and don't even, necessarily go to a doctor to solve that problem. But it is a problem. It does affect our quality of life, from things like, I'm feeling stuffy in the mornings, all the way to, in a meeting, if you're feeling tired, that might actually be attributed to the air quality and not necessarily the nature of the meeting.
And technically speaking, if you're getting allergies, if you're having issues from this, it's going to be something to do with inflammation, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of, so one thing that's happened in recent decades is that research on air quality and the impact of air quality and health is going deeper and deeper. So, for some of us, the very sensitive parts of the population, that the impact of air quality expresses as I have an allergy or I have an allergic reaction to pet dander or some sort of pollutant in the air, be that pet dander or be that mold or something worse. For others, it manifests in different ways. So we have now started linking through the research that we're doing on air quality. We've started linking, finding the link between air quality and heart disease, diabetes, cancer. And the reason is that, we breathe all the time. And in the breaths that we take, we're taking in mass from the air. That mass, the really small particles, goes deep into our lungs, and from our lungs can go into our bloodstream. So there's this huge connected impact that we have from the air we breathe that we're only just now starting to figure out.
So it's kind of like how most people have some type of intolerance to wheat. Most don't realize it. Some have celiac and can't touch it at all. But it's in general kind of a sliding scale between the extremities of how much or how little of something you can have. I know with a lot of the inflammation's kind of been attributed in a lot of ways to aging and most chronic diseases. That would mean that what you guys are doing in terms of trying to fight that is very directly, that you're probably not going to be able to say it because of FDA regulations, et cetera, but very directly tied into aging disease, et cetera.
Well, I think that what we're trying to do is destroy the triggers in the air that have been linked to these types of problems. symptoms, right? So this is where the field of medicine is evolving to, is let's not just try to solve at a symptom level. Let's go to the root cause of what's causing these problems to happen. And the fact that, by the way, the EPA said decades ago that indoor air can be up to 5 times more polluted, like that tells you something about the fact that we're living in environments where we're trapping ourselves with pollutants. And so, yes, we can take medication, we can take other things to maybe get at a symptom level solution. But what is happening and what are we doing about the triggers in the air that can impact us really deeply? And that's where this technology and what we started doing at Molekule came into play.
And if you put a Band-Aid on a dam long enough, eventually it breaks. What's it like building a science startup where you guys have fundamental technology and you're going about it in a hardware sense? You're kind of doing the two terrible things that you're not supposed to do as a startup in terms of incredibly cash intensive. What's it like raising money for a business like that and scaling it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right that there are a lot of challenges, but one of the things that Dilip and I, my brother and I came into this entire company with the mindset of was that we grew up, seeing our father in a university setting, and we saw all of this innovation, tremendous amounts of innovation happening that was ultimately sitting on a laboratory shelf. People weren't taking it and commercializing it because the steps to commercializing these technologies are either incredibly difficult, or larger companies that would license it would just shelve the technology and say, hey, we don't need to do that. For us, we came into this with a great amount of passion that we want to solve one thing. We want to make sure that people can breathe clean air. As simple as that. And so I think that the passion then led us naturally to find the next step and the next step and the next step. And so we knew that we had, luckily when we walked into the picture, because we had seen this evolution of the technology, our father had already spent a lot of time figuring out how do you take this laboratory technology and pilot it in a manufacturing setting. So we had already figured out one of the hardest steps, which is how do you take that lab technology and actually put it on a manufacturing line in a scalable way. And so we had that going into actually forming the process. That all happened in an academic laboratory setting. When we got started, we started talking to investors who had an interest to take on really large challenges. I mean, we found really like-minded individuals who believed in the vision of what we were laying out and weren't afraid to take on something as bold as, not just hardware, but scientific innovation. And that's where I think we had a meeting of the minds and really got started.
And how do you recruit a team for something like this, where there is, I imagine, a longer term payout until you get to some type of exit potential? A lot of startup employees are joining for the equity, for the thought of being acquired or going public. I feel like this would take longer personally.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was always, there's been this component of the mission and the vision that has inspired all of us, and myself included. I mean, it's about knowing that there has been an industry, if you look at what the industry is dominated by today, a HEPA filter, it was invented in the 1940s as a part of the Manhattan Project, by the way. So it's a really outdated technology, and it's something that you would think we would have evolved past, given that what we've done in computing, given what we've done in so many other areas of innovation. But we've kind of gotten stuck on this really fundamental problem. And so when we started looking to a team of people to come together, it was about, of course there was a weeding out process. You have to be willing to take on that challenge, and you have to be willing to go deep on, if you're a designer, if you're a marketer, if you're a operations and manufacturing person, you have to go deep on the science to be able to do it justice and help it exist in the world in the right way. But if you're able to do that, then, look at the problem that you're solving. And I think that was what our team really signed up for, is we want to solve this problem in whatever way is possible.
Talk to me about air quality and pollution stats, specifically deaths. I know a lot of them are happening in the third world, but just talk to me a little bit more so we can get a concept of the scale of the problem.
Yeah, well, I think it's like 3 million people every year die from air pollution. Like it's astronomical, but it's funny because a lot of people like to attribute that problem as, oh, it's happening in Asia or it's happening somewhere else. It's not happening here. But the American Lung Association put out a recent stat that in the past 2 years, 7 million more Americans are breathing unhealthy air. So there's a huge and growing problem here. I mean, we're in the San Francisco Bay Area. In the past 2 years, we've seen hugely devastating wildfire events where the pollution levels were the worst in the world. I mean, what you were breathing in a period of a week was massively more than, a normal day in Delhi. So, and Delhi being a really polluted city. So it was an eye-opener, and I think it helped all of us realize that, pollution doesn't have borders. The air we breathe doesn't have borders. So what we're breathing in one region doesn't stay there, it travels. And we're starting to see all of that compound on each other to the point where now a lot of organizations are ringing the alarm bell saying, hey, we need to do something about the air that we breathe.
Is there a way we could take the tech that you guys have been working on and scale it up for more large-scale outdoor solutions?
So, part of what went into being a science company is that we're continuously evolving, right? So we launched with a home air purifier, which you can find on our website today, and that cleans up to 600 square feet. But it's, the technology is evolving. We're putting it in newer and other spaces as we go. And the point of that is that we're evolving the technology to be able to address bigger and bigger challenges with air quality. And the way that we're doing that is we're looking at, inside of our device, we have our core technology exists on what's called a PICO filter. So our core technology is called photoelectrochemical oxidation, which is summarized in just PICO. So that PICO filter basically has a catalyst that's coated onto the filter surface. And when that catalyst sees light generated from LEDs inside of our device, it creates a chemical reaction. That's what allows us to destroy pollutants. So we've been able to destroy pollutants at a certain level of efficiency today. That's our first generation of PICO technology. But in our lab, we've unlocked Gen 2 and Gen 3, and we're bringing that out into our manufacturing processes so that as we have these innovations, we put it into our filters and we ship it out to customers. So that's part of what's happening here. And all of that innovation is helping us advance and evolve the technology to the point where you won't just be scrubbing the air like traditional outdoor scrubbers do for trying to clean the air, but you can actually fundamentally take the bad stuff in the air and convert it back to its original, more natural form or, less harmful form.
What do we need to do to get this to a price point that first everyone in the US and then everyone worldwide could afford one of these? Because right now they're kind of expensive when it comes to, especially a third world worker. That's not going to happen. How do we get this to the point where people can have democratization of clean air without killing the bank?
Well, I would say there's two parts to that. One is that, people are waking up to the fact that, hey, that something is wrong with what I'm breathing and I need to do something about it. And for something as, when you start looking at all the costs of what happens to your life because of the air that you're breathing, the investment pays for itself. And I'll explain this why. The reason for that is that, the cost that you pay to move a home because it's mold infested, the cost that you pay to get sinus surgery because something is wrong with your nasal passageways. I mean, people are paying these costs all over the world. That's in India, that's in China, that's in the US. People are going through to extreme lengths to be able to do something very fundamental, breathe. So for, when you compare it to that, the cost of this air purifier is nothing. And what it's delivered for people, the stories that we've heard back from our customers is that it's helped them massively cut down on a lot of the things that they're already spending on. Now, that's at a personal, very consumer level. But for us, we look at scaling up this technology in a way where tomorrow you won't have to think about, if I'm walking into a hospital, am I walking into a hospital that has clean air or not? You'll be walking into a hospital that has, PICO clean air. If I walk into an office building, in my conference room, if I, go to a daycare facility, if I'm traveling on a plane where we know that we're getting exposed to things that we shouldn't be, I should be breathing clean air. And that's something that, we look at the brands that we buy into as making massive shifts towards clean air. So that myself and others don't have to worry about it.
I would say you have a little bit of a filter when you think about this, though. I feel like a lot of people don't think about air quality almost at all, with the exception of being stuck in traffic and closing the windows. And I don't know how we change something like that. How do we make a societal shift on a big problem where, kind of like data privacy, people don't know or don't care?
Well, I think it's starting there. I think it's starting at, we're stuck in traffic, we're closing windows. It's something that people already recognize. I mean, we hear it from customers every day. It's people recognize that, hey, you may not say air quality, but you may recognize it as there's something musty in the air. It smells bad. The ways that we think about air quality are really more tangible. If I see dust everywhere on the floor, it must be in the air. I think we're starting to, as a society, understand that. And then the world is kind of, what's happening in our environment is forcing a lot of people to understand more about what's happening. Like I said, the West Coast, California, has seen, wildfire events 2 years in a row. The plumes of that smoke blanketed the entire nation. That meant that you weren't just breathing wildfire smoke in California or in Oregon or in Washington. You were breathing wildfire smoke in New York. So, we're starting to understand that these events that are happening in our external environment, be it wildfire smoke, be it, mold that is caused by, the water damage from hurricanes, those things are affecting our health. And that's how we understand air quality, is that there's things in the air that I really relate to that impact my health.
How do you think about the effect on climate change with the pickup that we have now in terms of health technology and where entrepreneurs need to be headed and looking with the big problems we have facing us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big challenge, right? I think that I think one of the difficulties that we face with climate change, which is also an opportunity, is that there's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot of innovation that needs to happen. And so as an entrepreneur, you can look at that and say, okay, now there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to make the world, make the environment better and safer. And if we were able to extract a lot of wealth from the world around us, to create the computers that we have today, the phones that we have today, we can tap into that same place of innovation and figure out how to put that wealth back into the environment so that our environment is the best it can be for human progress.
Does that need to be in terms of more taxes and some type of government or multi-government agency doing that? Or does that need to be something that entrepreneurs can tackle? Where do you fall on that spectrum of socialist, pure capitalist / libertarian in terms of solving some of these big and seemingly insurmountable challenges?
Yeah, so I, interestingly enough, also have a background in public policy and decided to become an entrepreneur kind of in a unique way, in that, like, on the spectrum of, for me, I want policymakers to do whatever policymakers do. As an innovator, I want to solve the problem. Like where Molekule sits and where our company really thrives is that we believe that these are solvable challenges. We just haven't, like I mentioned, my father's technology was sitting on a laboratory shelf until we decided to come and make it a reality. So for us, it's about what do we need to do in material science? What do we need to do in chemistry and physics to be able to solve the problems of the environment? And that's what we're trying to build into the heart of our manufacturing. That's what we're trying to build into the core of our company is, in order to solve these problems, whatever policies regulatory makers make, they're going to need to rely on innovation to get us out of this slump that we have with the environment. And so, no judgment on the solution. I think that for us, we just want to make sure that we're innovating to find, the next big breakthroughs in science that allow us to help our environment.
And speaking of your work with public policy, I know you are involved in public transit Talk to me a little about what you were doing, how you see the evolution of driverless cars and these electric scooters, and where we head to in terms of transportation.
Yeah, so you're going back a ways back there. So before Molekule, I was doing some work with a group out of the Stanford Design School called Change Labs. And our job was to look at, our mandate was to look at how do you take really complex, really interconnected issues that are on a global scale and actually solve them. And one of the things that we learned or we were trying to do is, part of the problem in solving these issues is that we're not necessarily going to the root of the problem. We're solving surface level things like, oh, great, we'll just have, we've been trying to build mass transit in California for decades, and yet we haven't been able to get something between LA and like a train between LA and San Francisco. So it's a complex problem. Our job was to go at a layer deep. So what is causing that? Why can't we make these massive shifts as a society? And for me, part of what Molekule is doing is addressing not necessarily transit, but it's going at part of the problem is that innovation often doesn't reach consumers, and that innovation gets stuck in laboratories. So the way I look at mass transit as a problem, the way I look at mass transit as a solution is how do we take laboratory level innovations and bring them to consumers so that we can actually get at the root of solving these problems.
So we got Larry and Sergey, they're trying to fly. We got Elon, he's trying to dig. We've got electric cars. Where are you putting your chips in terms of California and then in terms of larger scale public transit systems? Not necessarily in the US because it's just not built for it, but worldwide.
I mean, I would say that, let everybody try. I think that that's the point. I think we need to try a bunch of different solutions. We need to see what works and find a solution. I don't believe that one person has the right answer. I think that there is some combination of what everybody is doing. That's the point of what we've created is that, we've created the laboratories of experimentation in these companies. I'm curious to see where they end up. For us, for Molekule, what we're trying to do is something very similar. We have a technology that we believe can, in all of these environments, make the air safer and cleaner for people to breathe. And I want to see, we want to try to take that solution as far as we can. So I wouldn't, I think that's the entrepreneur, that's the innovative side is you want to see every solution tried to its maximum extent. It's only then that will actually solve these problems.
It's a little politician too, not wanting to pick who you think's going to win, but I'll give you a pass on that one. So let's get into smart homes a little bit. I would say what you're doing is not exactly a smart home tech, but you guys are kind of getting into that. I could very much see you guys wanting to get into that in the future, but that's neither here nor there. But what do you think about the advancements that we've had now in terms of creating smart homes with these Alexa systems, these Google systems? You can get the lights, you can get a lot of people are putting these speakers into their homes. Where do you think we're at now, and where do you see us going in 10 years when it comes to the smart home?
One of the things that I think about, I didn't start out as a tech person, and I still don't claim to be a tech person who understands, a vast part of these innovations. But I think what I can understand and what our company aims to understand is what do people ultimately take away from this? What do they understand from this? For us, that means that, basic things like I have a 1-year-old son. I have a safe environment for my 1-year-old son. I have 2 dogs. I want to make sure that they're safe. It goes back to what are our basic needs as humans and how are we serving that? So if a smart home is enabling peace of mind, great. There's going to be people out there who are going to be innovating in that space. Good for them. I'm more concerned about what's happening with the environment that people are living in. Are people getting safe, clean air to breathe? Are they getting safe, clean water to drink? All of the basic needs as human beings. And as much as smart home technology can enable that and make sure that I have the comfort that, not just the comfort, but the safety that I need in my home, then I think it's really exciting. So where we're going with our smart home tech and, with our connected ecosystem is 1, basic, clean the air, but 2, try to make sure that at a very deep level, we understand what's in the air that's causing us harm and work with researchers out in the world to understand, well, how does that affect us at a deeper level? What's the health impact of that? Because we still actually only understand a fraction of this, and we will in the coming decades understand a lot more, just like we did with food, just like we did with exercise and water. We will understand a lot more about what's in the air we breathe. And that's where Molekule will be spending more time and investing more of its energy and effort so that we can make sure that people have a really holistic image of what meets the requirement of a safe and healthy environment.
What about you as a person? Are you wearing any wearables? Are you into the quantified self movement? Have you got your DNA tested? What have you done personally to stay healthy outside of the air stuff?
I know, and I think that that's where I haven't done a lot of, I have a Google Home at home, but beyond that.
Do you trust it?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I don't have any. I mean, I think that there's generational differences on where this technology is at. For my generation, I think a lot of people are comfortable, but I don't. The point is that like I feel like there's a lot of conversation on the coasts of the U.S. about what smart home technology means, and there's a lot of the country that's still looking for much more basic needs to be met. I mean, that's where we as a company, that's where Molekule gets excited, is because, we want to try to serve that population of people who is, living in public housing projects and is breathing bad air, who's living, who is getting, people who are buying everyday manufactured materials that are, we know because we've seen manufacturing environments that those manufactured materials off-gas carcinogenic chemicals, and then they get packaged in a box and sent to people's homes. Like that's a concern for us. Those are the problems that we want to address. Well, I think all of this innovation will support that ecosystem, and we're definitely, we look at the ecosystem that's being created with smart homes as allies to what we're doing. We still know that there's everyday problems that people in this country and other countries globally are facing, whether it be simple things like, the air we breathe or water damage from, a leakage that's causing mold, the water damage itself. Like homeowners and people who live in apartments have tons of challenges that have to be met. And those are the challenges, and that's the space that I want to focus on.
How do we deal with that growing disparity between the, for lack of a better term, upper classes and lower classes when it comes to income inequality, which is getting bigger and bigger, especially thanks to tech's exponential nature? Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that I could answer that question with justice in, the time that we have, because I think it's really complex. I think it's one that it takes policy, but it doesn't just take policy. And that's something important to remember. It also takes innovation. I think the policy has to keep up with innovation. I think that policy a lot of times has been lagging to where innovation is at. But what innovation means is that it means you can have, clean air at lower prices in every building. It means that you can make things more accessible to people that weren't before. So I think we're getting there. It's going to take time. Innovation also has a lot of work to do. Like science still has a lot of work to do. And part of my job at Molekule is to see how we can accelerate that. Like I had seen, I mentioned this earlier, I saw my father sitting in a laboratory trying to say, how can we get the cost of solar to a point, and he's still looking to how can we make sure to get the cost of solar down below where fossil fuels are at today? How can we make sure that we can have, clean energy resources deployed in mass across the world? I think that these answers are now coming to fruition in laboratories. Our job at Molekule is to make sure that it doesn't get stuck there, that we're able to take that technology and bring it into people's lives so that it can help reduce that disparity, so that we can make sure that, you don't have to be living the idea that you have to live next to a highway because that's where the cheapest housing is. But then you also have to breathe all of the emissions from those cars and vehicles it makes us sad, and we want to do something about it. And that's where we look at technology as a gateway.
So not all entrepreneurs have the awesome scientist dad that's creating something incredible. How can other entrepreneurs get into the university setting and find technologies that are being created or have been created and commercialize them? Because there is so much great IP out there that just hasn't been capitalized on, which could benefit the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we just happened to, it wasn't just my dad, right? It was all of these other professors who we got to see growing up, who I circled back to actually many years later after we met them, after there was a get together back in Gainesville, Florida. And I would ask these professors hey, what happened to this, this technology you were working on that, would cut energy costs in dryers, for example, in washer dryers by up to 50%. I'm like, well, nobody ever commercialized that technology. So I think that academics are constantly looking for channels and ways to get their technology out in the world. They don't necessarily want to be the ones to have to do the job to create the company around it and commercialize it. But, so I think that for entrepreneurs, there's an opportunity to tap into university settings to leverage the innovations that are there. And I also would say that one other insight that we've had is to still, even if you leverage them, to make them part of the journey. So, have their voices at the table as you're creating something, because one of the most difficult processes that you have is taking a laboratory technology and transferring it with the original intent intact. Because a lot of times you have a technology that works really well in a small scale, but you have to make trade-offs as you scale it into manufacturing. And the important part is you make the right trade-offs. A lot of times people will go, too fast, too quickly, without talking to the academics and the scientists who created this to say, hey, what's the right trade-off I could make? And so that's where we've had that insight. And, I hope others can also share that insight.
What trade-offs did you guys have to make, and how do you think about them?
The trade-offs that we make, the types of trade-offs that we think about are the ones on the product level, right? So we know that our core technology, we would never make, we would keep that with its original intent. But the types of trade-offs that we have to make on, when you transfer this over from a laboratory setting, is the device that encapsulates the technology also, behaving in the way that the scientists had envisioned. Today, if you look at the air purification industry and you look at the way filters are made, a lot of times you think, well, you didn't even think about the basic science behind this air filter, which is that, you want air to actually flow through the filter. There's a lot of air purifiers that are made today with filters that aren't sealed. And so air will supposedly go through the filter, but a lot of the pollutants will just bypass the filter. So, that's a engineering and product and manufacturing person saying, hey, we could save 50 cents on the cost of this device without putting a gasket, well, the answer is no, you should put a gasket. So knowing what trade-offs to make, there are still ways to make a product cheaper. There are still ways to make sure that you can hit the cost targets that you're trying to hit, but it doesn't have to be at the cost of does the core technology work or not.
Outside of the technology that you guys are working on, what technology or trend are you most excited about and why?
I recently went down a really fun rabbit/wormhole of looking at companies that are interested in plastics recycling. So, what gets me excited about Molekule is we look at how to take pollutants that are harmful and convert them back to, it's really what nature is already doing, converting something harmful back to what its original form should be. It's just that nature's time scales take a long time. And so I've been looking at startups that have been taking, plastics that are polluting our oceans and waters, and how do you take that and convert it back to its original substances that weren't originally harmful. So I think a lot of where innovation is going to come is that, like I mentioned, we've been able to take a lot of things out of the earth, the environment, but putting them back is going to be really interesting, putting them back in ways that we can reuse them so that there's a really sustainable cycle to everything that we're doing. That's going to be exciting and interesting.
When you IPO this company or get acquired and you ultimately become rich and successful, What type of companies are you going to invest in? Will you be one of those startup founders that comes back and angel invests? Will you go on to do something else? I imagine you don't have a second project in mind. And even if you do, you wouldn't be willing to tell me because your investors might double or they might second guess your intentions. But what would you focus on as an investor if you did have the funds?
I think it would be to have for me, the future that really excites me is much broader and bigger in vision. So how do we bridge out of just looking at private sector innovations and public sector work as two separate ecosystems, but start creating alliances and coalitions to solve big problems? So, if and when there would be a moment to do that, then that would be the time to create coalitions to solve some of these big global problems. Like, I grew up with a father who, was researching solar energy, and I still feel like that vision has a lot to go. There's still a lot more to do on it, but I don't think that it can be done alone. So investment back into the coalitions that can solve climate change, that can make sure that we can have clean oceans. That's where I think there's a lot more to be done. And that's where I would focus my energy.
There's a ton more to be done there, but there's also the flip side. How do we deal not with the coalitions, but with Amazon selling facial recognition software to immigration or whatever Peter Thiel is doing in terms of helping round up people that may or may not have been deemed undesirable by certain governments? How do you think about big tech working with governments when in a lot of ways it violates what we feel seems right when it terms of means to be human?
My answer to that is going to be a little bit odd because I think that the solution to that is injecting more and more diversity into the people who are at the helm of these decisions. I think one of the things that, being a female founder has given me a lot of insight into it, and also having a male co-founder and having an extremely diverse team within our company is that the only way you can solve and tackle some of these complex issues is by having a complexity of thought at the table to think through all of the potential harmful and negative side effects. You won't be able to do that, though, if you have the same group of individuals looking at the same problem in the same way. So, all of these things that you're talking about have really complex implications. And so I think the first thing to do, which, is now starting to be talked about more, but the bar to get there is still really high, is how do you bring together a diverse set of people, in a government setting, in a private setting, to talk about these issues, because that's the only way you'll get enough ideas at the table. Which
is really challenging when all your politicians are old white guy senators and lawyers. It creates some dynamics. Have you ever had that situation where you are at this point a successful female founder? You're building a pretty awesome company. Did you ever have challenges in terms of with investors, board members, et cetera? You don't have to name any names, but in terms of building the business or any types of things that you don't think your male counterparts would have had to deal with?
Yeah, I think that I did my BS in mechanical engineering and my master's in mechanical engineering. I was one of 5 girls in a class of 100. I've seen this problem for a while. I've seen the challenges. I certainly think that what's come out of it is a better version of me. I think that, I've evolved. I don't want that to be the case for the next group of girls that comes through these challenges. They should be focusing on external challenges of solving some of the world's greatest problems. But it's an everyday struggle. And what's interesting, I think what's exciting is that there is a moment in time now where things are changing. And I'm seeing from both sides, I'm seeing, men and women come together to hear each other's perspectives. And I think that started for me within, the time span of building Molekule, where you've seen just a massive shift in people saying, hey, we need to hear women more, but it's become more of a dialogue. So I think that's where a lot of change is already happening. There's a lot of people who are willing and excited and coming to the table. And look, the people who are not there yet, who are operating in, a different model, innovation will surpass them. So I think that the thing that people are starting to realize is that there is an opportunity to move faster by doing this. We certainly see it at Molekule. I think others are catching on to it as well.
I know I studied mechanical engineering as well, so I'm very well aware of what you were talking about. If I was to give you a magical wand to try to fix this problem, and that's not to say we should have 100% 50-50 parity in all professions. I don't think that makes sense because people have different preferences. But in terms of making the situation better in a lot of the industries that matter, especially tech, how would you go about doing something like that?
I think the very first thing I would do is focus on education. And the reason is this. I think that one of the things that prohibits, it's not just women. It's not just a gender thing. It's a mindset thing. People across the world approach problems in very different ways. And today, what we've created is a world that has to think in, one very specific way. A lot of it is very methodical in nature. Like if you have to solve a problem, show me the data, show me exactly step by step how we're going to solve it. But there's this other side of us that leads through intuition. And, I've talked to so many women who have a natural intuition for, hey, this is how something should be done. So I think that the only way to get people to start, engaging on this issue is to get an appreciation for the different types of ways of thinking. And it doesn't have to be, that a female always leads through intuition. I've seen a lot of men who lead through intuition, but we don't teach how do you lead through intuition in schools. How do you leverage an internal voice? And I think that that'll start changing and start creating diversity at boardroom tables because we'll be able to appreciate different vantage points.
Not only do we not teach that, I would say we actively discourage that and focus much more on what can you prove? How can you write the mathematical proofs? Where did you find the sources, etc.? We separate things out versus taking a more holistic approach. Now, what is one thing that I should have asked you about that I just didn't?
I think that, the thing that not just you, but I think anybody should ask is, in the next, with the air that we're breathing, is this a solvable problem or not? And I believe it is. I think that we're getting closer and closer to solving this problem holistically. But the fact is that, is the air that we're breathing today acceptable or not? And is it solvable or not?
And speaking of both of those in terms of how to present that, if we had other entrepreneurs out there that were looking at raising funding, what would be the advice that you would have for them?
Just stay completely passionate about what you hold true to your beliefs. If you have a passion, don't give up on it. It sounds so cliche, but it is true. I think that, innovation and technology comes out of a fundamental belief that you really want to see something in the world. And when you put that belief out, you'll naturally start going on a path that will take you there.
How many no's did you guys get? And who was the first person to say yes?
We got tons of no's. I think as everybody gets tons of no's. There's a finite amount of investors out there, and they have to pick and choose from many companies.
For people that haven't tried, though, let's have context. Is that 10? Is that 100? Is that 1,000? Just so they can realize what it takes. Just a rough estimate.
I would say it's in hundreds. It's not thousands. It's not tens. It's more than tens. So it's somewhere between tens and hundreds. But we also got, I think there was a real moment of luck. Keep in mind that there was 20 years of no movement, right? There's 20 years of a lot of academic progress, but there was 20 years of only academic progress. So there was a lot of that before that my father experienced, but for Dilip and I, we experienced, tens to hundreds and happened to come across an unlikely, now seems very likely, but a really exciting investor, Jeff Clavier at Uncourt Capital, who was unlikely because we were in our incubator and he was there for mentor night. So you wouldn't expect an investor to be there. He happened to just decide to attend at mentor night. So we were talking to him as though he would be a mentor, found out later on he was an investor, and decided to give him our device, we had a literal black box at the time, and we gave him the black box to test for him and his wife. And he had another air purifier at the time and became a big believer and got excited about how the technology had impacted his wife's life, his son's life. And so that's how we got started, is that was our initial, he led our seed round. And so that was all kind of serendipity.
Jeff's a great guy. I had him on our other podcast, The Syndicate, and he's done some very impressive stuff. I have one last question for you before we start to wrap things up. And that's, if you were going to leave people with one thing, a quote, a call to action, before you tell them where to find you, what would it be and why?
That's a big one. I think the one thing I would say is, this is good. It's going to be cliche, but believe in yourself. I don't think that point is, it's somebody else said it, not me. Somebody much wiser than myself said it. But believing in yourself is something that we don't emphasize enough through the journey, and it is so tough. And you will have many, many moments of self-doubt and many moments of feeling afraid. And the only thing that will power you through it is belief and faith.
Because no one else will believe in you if you don't believe in you. Jaya, thanks for coming on today. Where's the best place for people to find out more about you, your company, and what you're doing?
Yeah, you can go on molekule.com. That's spelled molecule with a K. So molekule.com.
The typical startup fashion. And of course, we'll have links and everything in the show notes, guys. Disruptors.fm. If you enjoyed this, make sure you check out Molekule, check out what they're doing, and consider leaving us a review in iTunes. Disruptors.fm/iTunes. I know it's terribly clunky and painful, but if you do that, that helps us a ton, and I would greatly appreciate it so we can get more awesome guests like Jaya on the program. Thanks for coming, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Jaya.
Thanks.
Be the change you want to see in the world. That's something I strive towards and fail towards every single day. If you enjoyed this podcast, if you think the world could benefit from conversations like this, the greatest compliment you can give us is referring to the Disruptors to a friend or talking about us on social media. Please take 30 seconds to do so. It would mean the world to us, and if we're lucky, help us build towards a better world. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for helping us spread the message, and have a great day. If you want more of the Disruptors, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or go to disruptors.fm, where you'll find tons of audio and video interview stories with leaders in the fields of genetics, cryptocurrency, longevity, AI, space, VR, and much, much more. You can also follow me on Twitter at MattWardIO. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a quick review on iTunes at disruptors.fm/iTunes to help more people discover the podcast and help us make a bigger impact.